Intentional Fallacy is a seminal paper by Wimsatt and Beardley. They here talk about role of intention in literary work and role of intention in criticism of this or that literary work. So they are basically critiquing how other critics use intention as a kind of parameter for judging a poem or other work of art. First of all, they summarizes some abstraction axioms which are as follow. First of all, they talk about how some critics say that poem does not come into existence by some accident. Means some creative agency are used by poet in order to create it. But that is not a standard by which critic should judge a poem. Because what is poem? It is something that is written on a page. It is not the process of creating it. So that is not the object of criticism, to study that process. That is very much different thing. That is the subject of psychology maybe, but not of criticism. Second proposition was that intention of a poet is not a physical object. So we cannot find it and exactly say that this or that was the intention of poet while creating this work. There are two scenarios actually. If a poet succeeds in what he intended originally, then we may find it in poem. But if he has not succeeded, then we have to go beyond poem, like how Wordsworth wrote some poem, how he wrote daffodils. He was strolling across the country yard and he saw flowers and then he saw clouds and then he wrote it. Or how Coleridge wrote Kubla Khan because he dreamt it. We have to go towards this biographical details, which is not the subject of our criticism. It is outside of poem. So we cannot take these biographical references as evidence. Now we cannot find intention again because poetry can be perceived through its meaning. Whatever we see in it, it is intended. It is not like speech that whatever comes to his mind, writer says. Poetry is a delayed art. We can edit it. So whatever we see there, every word, every punctuation mark, every line is intended to be there. And that is the nature of the form. That poet can edit it again if he doesn't like a word here or there. So we cannot say that it is all, it has some intention because it is intended involved. But that is not the standard by which we should judge it upon. And some critics says that poems are very personal affairs. So still we cannot determine what role intention plays there. Like if we read a poem about a speaker reacting to a situation, it is natural that we think of action and behaviors as his, whose speakers, not of poets, unless we have some biographical references, which is again outside of the text we are critiquing. The sense that the author can achieve better by revision, but revision also indicates a fracture in intention. Like If someone has written a poem, then he revises it, edits it. That makes us question his intention. So we cannot judge that poem by how his intentions were before or after. In these five propositions, the intention comes as a kind of standard for critiquing a poem. But our authors, Wimsatt and Beardley, they are refuting it. They are saying that it is not something we should make a standard of critiquing a poetry. They say that a poem is free from the control of author and belongs to language which can be called a public property. It's true that poetry is, once it is written, it is read by many. So author has no control over it because various individuals would interpret it differently. Now, then he talks about Anand Kumar Swami's critique on intentionals, school or school thought, whatever we give name it to. But we can skip it. And in the third part, they say intentional fallacy is romantic one. From Homer to Horace to Goethe, it is more of a romantic notion that author has an intention and we should judge it by that. So the words like genius, inspiration, they comes into play if we consider intention as a major factor while critiquing it. The thing is, we are not here denying that author has an intention and he cannot, or that he can create something without intention. Always author has some intention. Like Shakespeare wanted to write good drama. That was the intention. He wanted to write good thriller, good tragedy, whatever. The point is, we should not see that intention and make it the prime subject of our criticism of this or that work. Writing poetry is very much different from evaluating poetry. Coleridge was a poet and critic both, but his poetry is different from his critical work. Also, the criticism of poetry is very different from author psychology. They are two different things, and yes, there are connection between them. A poet's poetry has some connection with his or her biography. It happens because art is subjective all the time. It cannot be just objective. But poetry and biography are not one and same thing. So one cannot take the place of other. And we should know that. We can take some evidences while critiquing a work. Internal evidences are something which are hidden in language. When we know language, we can reveal it, we can unveil it. External evidence are private or idiosyncratic. That means it is attributed to a very individual behavior or trait. And third is intermediate. It is about meanings attached to words for a poet or his group. Like for 20th century people, the word cool, COOL, means something that is called. But we now attribute word cool to a personality. So that kind of thing is intermediate evidence. That if someone uses intermediate cool word in 20th century, it can have only one meaning. But someone uses it here, then we should know that it can mean two things. So that is the important evidence that we can find. But if we think about it, this whole evidence thing creates problem for criticism, because the external evidence, that is individualistic, and intermediate evidence, which is very restricted for a time, so they can merge into each other and may create problem for activity of criticism. Then author gives example of Kubla Khan and goes about explaining their theory. But all in all, it has only one singular point, that a work of art, a poem or a novel or a drama or an essay, should not consider the intention of author while critiquing it, but only what it is. So we deny the existence of author's biography or existence of even author when we practice new criticism. So in easy words, intention fallacy is all about how intention does not matter while critiquing a poem.